So welcome everyone to the Foster podcast. I am DJ McCauley, a science writer for CSA News Magazine and a Foster member. And today I'm really excited to introduce Amy Lee Lillard. Amy is the author of a brand new book of short stories, Dig Me Out. She's published fiction and nonfiction in LitHub, Vox, Barrelhouse, Foglifter, Epiphany, and Off Assignment, among many other places. By day, Amy is a copywriter and marketer with 20 years of experience in the field, and she's the co-host of the very funny and feminist podcast, Broads and Books. I'm excited to talk to her today about her writing process and how all of her very incredible different experiences have shaped up to create how she writes today. So Amy, tell us, when did you know you wanted to be a writer?
Oh man, I think that, I was trying to think about this earlier because I think I grew up here in Iowa in the Midwest in the 80s. And I think that there was no language for wanting to be a writer. I knew that I loved stories. I loved stories in books. I read as much as possible, as widely as possible. I knew that I loved TV and music and all that kind of stuff. So, but when it came to creating that, I had no clue how that all happened. It felt like magic. It felt like something far away from Iowa and from my life and my street full of people who were bankers and firefighters and policemen and, the working class kind of folks. So even though I knew I wanted to, or I loved stories, it wasn't until I was maybe like 12 or 13 when I read Margaret Atwood, The Handmaid's Tale, which was way too old for that age, but I read it anyway and I loved it. And I still have my copy. Here's a visual aid, DJ. My copy from 1989, maybe. Yeah. And I read that and I think that's when I was like, wait a minute, that's what I want to do. I want to write stories. I want to write crazy, powerful things that then I've gone on to read every few years and get something new from that. And so it was a moment of like, awesome, I want that, but I still have no idea how to do that. And it took me a long time after that to figure out, the path to get there.
Yeah, well, tell us more about the path, because I know you mentioned before you have a lot of different experiences that haven't necessarily been published.
Yes. When I was in college, again, there's the dream that I wanted to do, but when you're in college, you have to find something to make money. And so what I did to do that, I tried to blend being a writer and into something that, was professional and legit and all the kinds of things. So I became a writer for advertising, for academia, for healthcare, trade magazines. I've worked at my current company in communications for about 10 years. So I built a career through writing, but in a very specific business type of writing. And then on the side is where I tried to pursue a passion of fiction writing and other kinds of writing. And because no one's paying you to do that, no one's asking you to do that, it takes a long time. It's also very much a lot of questioning yourself, like, why are you compelled to do this? Why must you persist at this, even if you don't think you're very good? And why, how can you keep up this, this desire and this dream to do that? So I know, Dita, you and I talked previously about the fact that this book, Dig Me Out, is not the first book that I wrote. I wrote a number of novels in my 20s and 30s, and I tried to do the things that you're supposed to do. I found out, you're supposed to have an agent and you're supposed to have follow this specific path. So I tried all of that, and it's a very subjective path. And so it didn't work. And I realized now it didn't work partly because it sucked and I needed to get better at what I was doing. But it's a very, very, very humbling experience, especially when you don't really have access to that kind of world and you don't have the language for what you need to do to get there. So it's only in the last maybe 5 years or so that I feel like I've gotten traction, which means that I'm an author that's debuting a little later in life, but I'm kind of proud of that.
Yeah. Well, tell me, I'm curious because I think a lot of people, say they have like the next great American novel in them, or everyone has a novel in them. But what kept you going when you were like obviously doing fine with your career path that involved writing? Like, why did you keep looking for creative outlets?
I thought about that a lot because, I think like many people, I struggle with self-worth and self-esteem and all that kind of stuff and various, mental health issues that people just struggle with. And I don't know why, because there were so many times and so many other things that I jettisoned from my life, but this always stuck with me. And I don't know if it's because I recognized it from an early age that this is what I love to do. I don't know if I just couldn't see anything else. I don't know, what it really was, but I knew that there was a compulsion within me, a drive to get this out there. And I also knew that when I didn't write, I was somewhat miserable. And I learned that by, like I said, I wrote a few novels that never went anywhere. And after the first one of those that took a few years, and I wasn't getting traction and it just never went anywhere, I took that as a failure of myself. I internalized that as like, well, you suck at this. You have this dream and you're no good at it. So you just shouldn't try anymore. You shouldn't write anymore. And so for few years, I didn't write and I was miserable. And it was only when I gave myself permission again to like, well, let's try it. Let's do it again. Did I start to feel whole in a way, or start to feel at least that I had an outlet for all the things within me.
Yeah, so I'm curious because I know that if I go too long without like journaling or just kind of like getting my thoughts on paper, I feel like a soda can that's been like shaken up. I'm just like, oh my gosh, something has to give. So for you, is that outlet mostly creative? Is it mostly like short fiction, or how did you find yourself shaping what you were putting out there in the world?
I think that at first it was mostly fiction. Over time, I've come to sort of accept that I also have an urge to write nonfiction, whether that's journaling, like you said, just for me, or whether it's personal essays and things like that, which I've kind of done a bit of over the past couple of years. And I think it's a little bit of both. That I know that there's sometimes when I feel like I don't have it within me to write fiction. I don't have it within me to create, to make up stuff, but I have it within me to write down all the stuff that's swirling in my head. And I know that that will make me feel better. And if I can get there, at least, I think I've become more forgiving over the years of like, instead of having a strict, like you have to write 1,000 words a day of fiction and you have to do this and this and this. I find that that's very counterproductive for me. So it's whatever works, whatever feels good at the time, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Well, I want to double back because I know that you kind of went back to school for writing like later. Can you tell me about why you decided to go get an MFA and what that was like?
I think it was a couple things. One, like I said, I'd written a few things that as I kept writing, I was getting more proud of my writing. Like, look at that. That doesn't totally suck. That's great. But at the same time, I knew I could get better. I just didn't know how to get better. And so I wanted to go to an MFA program to help, to figure out ways in which I could grow and to find the voice that I was sort of struggling to find. I knew that one nice thing about some MFA programs is you don't have to be there, right? There's low residency programs. So I did that while I was working, and it was a way for me to pursue my passion while still having money for, bills and stuff, which is great. The other reason I wanted to do it is because of that issue of access and language. Although over the years, I'd sort of taught myself the process of getting a book published, what agents are like and what publishers are like and what kinds of steps are part of the process, I still very much felt like an outsider because, living in the Midwest, there's not a big central publishing, place, like if you're in New York or on the coast or anything like that. And so I knew going into a program like that, I wanted to meet other writers. I wanted to meet people connected to the industry. And in that way, maybe demystify the process a little bit, as well as find like, oh, I'm like this person and they figured it out. So it was both of those things. And thankfully, the experience gave me both of those, which was wonderful.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I know when we talked before, you mentioned that you had a couple novels and then you went to this MFA program and there was kind of a shift in your format to short stories.
Mhm.
Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, it was so weird because before that, I'd never even really read short stories much. I was the kind of reader that thought only a big fat novel could be satisfying. I love being able to, and when I think about reading, I think about, especially when I was a younger kid, diving into a big fat book and just feeling safe for amount of time, and that stuck with me for a long time. And it was only around the time that I went to grad school that I started being exposed to more short stories, understanding how even a 20-page story can be intensely and amazingly satisfying. And it was that exposure to those kinds of stories. I remember reading Karen Russell and other writers in the program that I realized like, oh, wait a second, like this is pretty cool. Plus, I really enjoy that some short stories are so exciting with different genres and formats. Like you can really experiment and do different things in short stories that maybe are not sustainable over a longer book. And that really appealed to me because I like to get weird. I like to try different forms. I like to try different voices. Which is apparent, I think, in my final book, in that each of the stories is a little bit different in that way. And it was those two things where I was like, wait, okay, short stories, that's pretty cool. So I started writing that, and immediately there was a sense of like, oh, this really clicks. This really fits. Not to say that I've set aside novel writing, but it was a moment of discovery that was really exciting.
Yeah. Well, I want to dig into the, I guess, supernatural sort of side of things fitting in with short stories, but can you give us a specific example of one of your stories and how maybe that premise wouldn't work over like a novel?
Yes. There's a story in my book called Bull in the Heather. And it's in the format. It's so throughout the stories, there's a number of stories that are set in the present. There's a few stories set in the future. There's at least one or two set in the past. Generally, I would describe the book as stories of women who are no longer accepting the titles and the roles and the stereotypes being pushed upon them, and they're breaking out in some way. They're digging out in some way. So the story Bull in the Heather is set in a future in which women who reach a certain age have to run for election to continue their lives. And the format of the story I decided was going to be in a transcript, the transcript of a speech given at the moment of the election results. I came up with that during the time of Trump being elected and speeches being just mutilated, and decided like, hey, this could be a really cool format. I love it for a short story because I think it's a very powerful, short, quick hit of a narrative. I don't know if it would work over a 300-page novel. It might get really tiresome. It might be, you want to know, inside other people's heads versus just this one person. So it's things like that really appealed to me about short stories.
Yeah. How do you know when you're done with like a short story? I feel like it could be easy to draw it out too much.
Yes, it can. And it is a very tough question that I don't know if I fully know the answer to. But I think what I've come to realize in my stories is that I'm not always ending at the end. I'm ending at a moment at which several things could happen, and I leave it to the reader to decide what those things are. That could be really annoying to some people. It could be very cool to some people. I think when I know that I'm done is when I reach a moment where I'm like, I don't know if I want to go any further. I want to, like, I have an idea in my head of where they go, but it could be cool in other ways. So maybe just leave it up to the person reading. Or maybe, this moment of decision is really where this character was headed. And that's the most important thing.
Oh, I love that. Yeah. Well, I'm curious what your editing process has been like for your short stories.
There's Ziggy the cat, by the way. I know podcast listeners can't see, but here he is. I'm sorry, what was your question?
No, you're good. I'm curious about your editing process, especially when you were putting together these short stories for a book.
Mm-hmm. I think there were a couple components of the editing process. One was determining which stories made the cut and which didn't. And if that was left totally to me, this would probably be a book of 30 stories. Like, I have no ability to trim that down. It was really a matter of talking with my editor and my publisher. And he had a really firm sense of, because I think I had maybe 15 stories in the draft that I gave to him, and it whittled down to 10. And in his mind, which is why he was a good editor, he had a sense of like, these 10 stories feel like a cohesive whole. Like I said, left up to me, I'd be like, nope, put them all in, all the stories, great. So that's why he's, a publisher and an editor. When it came to individual stories and their editing, it was a matter of a couple, both myself looking at the story and seeing if there were ways that I could change things in a beneficial way. And there were my editor looking at the stories and thinking the same thing. For example, there is a story called Head Like a Hole. And it's based on, or it's focused on a couple in their late 40s in the suburbs. And the wife, there's a hole that appears in the front yard of this suburban home. And the wife convinces her husband to watch at night because the hole keeps getting bigger and she wants to find out what's happening here. When I first wrote that story, it was from the perspective of the husband, and it was him looking at her and trying to figure out what the hell's going on and where did my wife go. When I looked at it, maybe a few months after the initial draft, there was a sense of like, I don't know if this is working. And I realized it was a matter of perspective. So I rewrote the story from the wife's point of view. And in my mind, it was much, much stronger. And my editor had seen both versions and he agreed. So there were big issues like that. There were smaller issues. And then there was the big, what makes it in the collection that I left totally to him, because he knows that better than I do.
Yeah. Did you have a hard time letting go of any of the stories that didn't make the cut?
Yes. And so I want them to exist in some way in the future, whether that's another collection or, getting them placed in other magazines and things. Yes, there's definitely some more I want the world to see.
Yeah. Well, tell me, so I want to double back because you mentioned how hard it was for you to go through the process of finding like an editor or an agent or navigating book publishing, but how did you get to the point where you found your editor and you started working with him on this book?
Well, like I said, when I embarked on my MFA program, part of the reason was I wanted to find some sort of access and meet other people in the publishing industry. And it just so happened that the person that became my publisher and editor was in the program. And I had become friends with him at the time. He's a phenomenal writer in his own right. His name is M. Allen Cunningham, and his press is Atelier26 Books. And after I graduated my program, he offered, he said, this is really fantastic. I would love to publish this. But he also encouraged me, like, listen, this could be something really big. If you would like to try the agent route, you should try it and see what you think. So it was such a kind and generous thing for him to do. And so I sent my book out to a few different agents, and one took me up on it, and I worked with her for a year. It was after a year that I realized that we just had different views of the book. We had different goals for the book, and they weren't quite meshing. So I did the unthinkable, and I broke up with my agent. Especially when you're new to what this whole world is, that seems like the ultimate no-no. But it was also a matter of like, I feel confident enough because someone gave me the confidence and empowerment to say, hey, try this, but know that I still want your book. And it was after a year when I realized, I don't know if we have the right partnership, me and my agent. And I think I really want to go. with my friend and mentor and publisher, Mark. And so that's what I ended up doing. And I'm so glad I did, because I think that, Atelier26 Books is a small press. And I think there's so much been written and talked about the value of small presses versus maybe some of the bigger conglomerate presses. And if you're not familiar with that world, small presses, I think generally can take more risks. They can produce more books by different kinds of people. You're going to see a lot more variety of voices. You're going to see a lot more variety of content. And that's exciting to be a part of that versus maybe some of the bigger, more corporate publishing houses.
Yeah. Well, I know that a big component of working with corporate publishers is maybe like a book tour. And you did do a book tour, and it was in 2021, right?
Yes. Yeah, it was last fall.
Okay. Yeah. Tell us about that. What was the book tour like?
It's interesting that it happened right now, because starting in 2020, anybody who had a book coming out, all the in-person book events at bookstores and things were canceled in favor of virtual events. And as that was happening, I was kind of bummed, because I was like, oh, it'd be really cool to go to all these bookstores. By the time it came around, I was so psyched it was all virtual. It's like, this is fantastic, because I could have so much more access to other places. And what I ended up doing, because I went with a small press, there's no publicist, there's no, help there in terms of promoting your book, or no, huge, like big money push kind of help. So I did a lot of things that I found in this book, which I want to recommend to any listeners, which is called Before and After the Book Deal by Courtney Mom, who is a wonderful writer in and of herself. And this is a Bible for anyone who is interested in book deals, for anyone who has a book deal, for anyone who's trying to figure out, well, what the hell am I supposed to do now, kind of thing. How to promote yourself, how to believe in yourself. It's really powerful. All that to say, there were some great tips in there about like, just reach out to bookstores, pitch yourself to bookstores, pitch yourself to media outlets, pitch yourself to podcasts. You can do that. You have the right to do that. And so that's what I did. I spent many months reaching out to, like I said, media, but also for the book tour, reaching out to local Midwest independent bookstores, as well as a couple of bookstores on coasts that I had connections to via other writers and things. And so, yeah, I ended up scheduling 5 or 6 events. One of them was in person here in Des Moines, Iowa, which was really exciting. And it was a number of conversations with other writers. At least 1 or 2 were conversations with my podcast partner, which was very fun. And yeah, it was very exciting. It was not quite what you imagine when, you're about to embark on a book deal. You think like, oh, stardom, here I come. That's not how it works. And I'm glad that it didn't. It was a much more vulnerable experience than I thought it was going to be. So it was nice to have these virtual events that were much more accessible to people attending as well as myself.
Yeah. Well, I know you have a marketing background, and that's something that I think would freak me out a little bit, is like navigating how to market yourself and sell what you've written. And obviously you care very deeply about, but what was it like to, I guess, promote your book and to look for ways to sort of get the word out?
I realized as I was going on that there's 2 me's, right? There's the hustler me that was out like promoting, like pitching all these bookstores and promoting like myself on media. And like, I was acting like I was a publicist to myself. And that was great. And then when it came time to actually like, I'd arranged these bookstore events or I'd arranged these interviews. And then there was the actual me that was terrified. Like, why did I do this to myself? Why did I schedule this event? Why did I do this? So it was very like validating and exciting and really cool to, have readers come to these events, both virtual and in person. But it was also really like, whoa, I may have marketed a little too hard, and I don't know if I'm ready for that. So there was theoretical and then there was actually doing it, which were 2 different things.
Yeah.
And I was kind of pissed at hustler me after a while.
That's awesome. I mean, I can totally see how the marketer in you would be very excited about all this, and then when it comes time to start talking about yourself, it's a whole different.
It's so weird, and like I said, I was in advertising and it was in all these things. So I was very practiced and very excited about writing things about other people and highlighting experts in fields and stuff like that. And then it was like me was the expert, and I was like, oh shit, people are going to find out I'm an imposter. I am just faking it and everyone's going to know. Standard imposter syndrome stuff. It affects us all.
Pretty relatable for
Yeah.
sure. Oh gosh. Well, I guess that's the connection with the marketing, but you told me too that your podcast has been really helpful in terms of working with the book. Tell us about that. Yeah.
Yes. So my podcast partner and friend, Aaron, and I started a podcast in 2019 called Broads and Books. And as you mentioned, we're the funny and feminist book podcast. And what we do is every other week now, we select a theme, and each of us then pick a novel from that theme, and we pick a nonfiction or other genre book from that theme, and we pick a pop culture pick. So for example, a recent one was Path of Wellness, which was based on a Sleater-Kinney song, which I'm obsessed with that band, and I will stop talking about it because otherwise it's going to go forever. Anyway, we chose that as a theme. So then we chose books about like con men and all the like wellness traps and culty kind of MLM stuff. And so it was a super fun and exciting episode where we just got to talk about books, but then also all these things like essential oils that we think are ridiculous. And it was great fun. What we also do, and we started this maybe about 6 months in, is we talk to authors about the books that they write, but mostly about the books that they love. So recent example, A.E. Osworth, who wrote the book We Are Watching Eliza Bright. We talked to them last summer, and we asked them, what were the kind of books you like to read growing up? And what are the books you're reading now? And what are the books you're looking forward to? So getting another author to nerd out about books like we do, which is super fun. But as myself, as a writer, it's been very interesting to talk to those authors who talk about their influences, talk about their insecurities, talk about the ways that they've navigated the book industry. And it's very enlightening and very interesting, as well as totally relatable too. Like, oh, they're just normal people like us. Cool. Okay, that's achievable. At the same time, by talking about different types of books, and by setting this format for ourselves in which we're reading novels and other genre books, I've exposed myself to so many different kinds of writing, which I think has helped my own writing. Just knowing what kinds of reading things that I maybe wouldn't have read before, more true crime books, more memoirs, more graphic novels, that kind of stuff. It's been really cool to just immerse myself in what's out there, and then, like all of us do, steal the stuff that we really like and make it our own. And I think that's what I've done.
Yeah. That does sound like good fun. I mean, it's just great to have people answer your emails. So it's awesome that you have the podcast.
And that was another situation where we just started pitching people, just cold emailing, just like, well, let's see what happens. And it was the hustler us doing it, where I was like, yeah, awesome. Okay, we got Mona Watt and we got Sarah Weinman. And then when the time for the interviews come, both Aaron and I are like, oh shit, what are we doing? Why did we do this to ourselves? And yeah, it's always a great time though. It's super fun.
I love it. I'm curious too. So when you sit down to write, maybe for work or for your fiction, does your process change depending on what you're working on?
Yes. I'm trying to think how I could encapsulate that too. I think that when I've been writing for my career stuff, so, advertising, communications, all that kind of stuff. One thing that I've learned over time is how to write fast, how to write effectively, how to write, to hit all the messages that you're supposed to hit, to write in the voice that you're supposed to write in. Those are really tough skills to learn, but then once you learn them, they become part of your writing ability. So there's like there's sort of that mode that I can turn on when I'm at work, or even sometimes if I'm writing in nonfiction on my own. When it comes to fiction, you know, there's no rules, there's no messages I have to hit, there's no like voice that I'm trying to emulate, no CEO that I'm trying to, you know, pretend like I am. It's just me. And it's very fun, but it can also be very scary and very like, because as restrictive sometimes as those rules can be for advertising, marketing, that kind of writing, they're also a safety net. They're sort of like, you know, helping you so you don't get too far out of the edges, you don't get too weird, you know, and there's levels of review that you have to go through. And so everyone is designed to make sure that you stay on task and on target. When you're writing fiction, it's just you. And like I said, it's very empowering and powerful, but it can also be like, oh shit, I've got too weird. I'm going way too far off the edges here. And it's only myself to reel me back. So I think it takes a lot more mentally in order to think about that kind of stuff. Whereas with the nonfiction stuff now, it's just a muscle that you turn on and it's pretty much there. So yeah, you think that answers question a little bit? Yeah.
Yeah. No, I was just thinking about that. We had some copywriting stuff we were working on today, and it is kind of like ticking a box. You're like, yeah, all right, there it is. That's what we needed.
Yes.
How do you balance, I guess, having a full-time, you know, day job with writing?
It's been an ongoing, well, if I don't want to say challenge, but it's been an ongoing thing to learn and to adapt. And I think one thing, I have to allow myself breaks and rest. There's a tendency, I think, probably for all of us. I mean, we're in a capitalist culture that tells us to work all the time and to hustle and to produce and all that kind of stuff. So when you have free time, you're guilting yourself if you're not writing more. And when I say you, I mean me. This is what I'm doing. I'm telling myself like, oh shit, you can't watch 4 episodes of whatever this is because you need to write more. And that's all fine. I think there's value to having drive and having ambition and feeling like you could do more. But I've discovered I really have to let myself have extended rest, you know, and consider the fact that even if I'm not actually writing, there's stuff going on in my head. I'm watching whatever cheesy show I'm watching, but there's still something going on in my head where I'm like, oh, I like, you know, how they developed that character. I like how they instituted this plot twist. Like that's some really cool stuff that sort of then, you know, percolates in my head and it will come out at some point. So I have to trust in that and just ease up on the guilt, which is tough.
Yeah, most definitely. You reminded me of, oh gosh, I was listening to one writer talk and he calls it putting it in the blender, like you're taking everything in. And then when you work on fiction, it comes out as like a smoothie of all the stuff you consumed. Like,
yes, it totally is. And so sometimes if people are asking like, where'd you get the idea for this? Or where'd you get the idea? I have no idea. Like it's in the soup back here. It's in the blender, you know, and it just weird stuff comes out and some of it works and some of it doesn't.
Yeah. Gosh, well, I'm curious, what advice would you give to someone who's maybe trying to navigate working and writing as like a passion project or something they want to fulfill outside of work?
I think it really relates to what I was just talking about the pressure on yourself. Like, I know that we are getting so many messages from society, from social media, from ourselves, from our internalized voices that say, you got to work harder, you got to work faster, you got to get your shit out there before anybody else. You have to make sure, you know, you have to just push and push and push and push. And I think, if anything, the last couple of years have maybe shown us that there are limits to that because we are going to burn out hard. And I think a lot of us are burning out hard. Like I said, my current job is working for a company called Aeon, and we put out some thought leadership on business concepts and things going on in the world. And we recently published a piece about burnout and about languishing. And it was so interesting because when we're writing these articles, we're talking to big leaders in the organization, corporate people that are saying like, listen, I'm feeling it too. Everyone's feeling it. We are all really, really tired. And this world is just becoming a little bit too much. All that to say, I think we have to recognize that and recognize that if you can't write right now, that's okay. If you can't write 6 months from now because you're still reeling from whatever's happened over the last 2 crappy years, that's okay. You know, like I said before, I kind of punished myself in a weird way and didn't really write anything for several years. And as hard as that was, and later how like I felt like I needed to get out of there, I think it was also okay, you know, because during that time I was living and I was making a lot of mistakes and I was doing some really good stuff, but it all became part of who I am so that I was then able to write later on. So persistence is great, but also giving yourself permission to rest, to not write. It's not going to ruin you, you know, take, like, if you've heard anything from the last hour or so, like, you know, take that to heart. This has been a long, long process for me. And as frustrating as that is, and as sort of, you know, sometimes you feel like time is running out, it works out, and it's going to be okay. It's going to be okay. It's going to be okay, DJ.
Thank you. No, that was just so beautiful. I like feel like I needed to hear that today for sure.
Yeah, I think, you know, I think we're all sort of struggling, and especially those who are passionate about doing things outside of the norm, doing things outside of our day jobs. That's, you know, it's good to have that passion, but we can really beat ourselves up, and we got to stop that.
Yep, I hear you. Is there anything I missed that you want to mention?
I think we had a good talk.
Yeah, that was such a nice
Yeah.
note to end on. Where can everyone find you if they want to go out and get your book? Or
you can find me at amyleelillard.com, all one word. And you can also find us at broadsandbooks.com. And at both places, you'll find my book, Dig Me Out. You'll find links to other writing that I've done. And at Broads and Books, you'll find links to episodes that will make you laugh, hopefully, and make you feel better about the weirdness of the world and give you good books to read.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for joining us, Amy. This was great.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.